Good morning, everyone. I'd like to start by just acknowledging the contribution that my daughter helped me in, and she guided me through preparing this presentation. And I'm privileged that she has asked me today to tell her story. She's only 12. So these are one of the very few photographs I was able to find of myself when I was pregnant. My daughter was delivered 1 week after this photograph was taken. My pregnancy was normal up to week 13, and then I started to bleed quite heavily. And for the next 12 weeks, I spent a lot of time in and out of hospital. When I got pregnant, I didn't have any expectations. I just assumed, like the rest of mums to be, that everything would go normally. I didn't give any thought to it until things weren't going normally. And that's when I began to crumble. I felt that because my pregnancy was then out of my control, and my obstetrician at the time was of the opinion that perhaps because the pregnancy wasn't going to last, he, at week 13, asked me to come back at week 28, and if I was still pregnant, we would continue. And I felt that gap was it was a burden for me. I felt neglected, I felt unimportant as a mum to be, and I didn't feel supported. I was having a high-risk pregnancy. I didn't know what was going on. There was nothing I could do to prevent what was going to happen, but I felt for myself as a person I was not supported. Over those 12 weeks, I put myself on bed rest after week 13. I did not leave my front room. I was doing everything I could personally to keep my baby inside, but day by day, my mental health was suffering. I had no support to help me get through the day. I changed obstetricians, and I found a lovely lady who was willing to bring me into her unit once a week, give me an ultrasound scan. For those couple of hours, I felt normal. I felt I could see my baby moving inside of me. We knew things weren't going great, but at least I felt happy that she was still alive. For the rest of that week, until I saw my next scan, I was lost. At week 25 plus 6, Amelia was delivered by emergency section. I suffered from a placenta abruption, which was quite serious, and I didn't see her at birth. She was whisked away. She was resuscitated for about 9 minutes, and it was 24 hours before I got to see Amelia. And when I did get to see her, I didn't know what she looked like. I remember entering the NICU. It was an open bay unit, 10 beds, very bright, nurses station based in the middle of the unit, very, very busy, very noisy. And I couldn't recognize my daughter, even though I had given birth to her 12 hours previously. And it broke my heart, because as a mum, you're meant to know what your child looks like, but I had utterly no idea. I would have taken any baby that they had put in my arms. I was just willing, I just wanted to see a baby. The unit It wasn't family-centred care orientated. The word family-centred care was never mentioned during my stay. It was 12 years ago. Unfortunately, it's a unit that still has a lot of work to do in that area. Parents were most definitely considered visitors. We were not allowed to interact with our infants. We were allowed to sit next to the incubator if you arrived at the unit early enough to get a seat. There weren't enough seats for each incubator. And skin-to-skin wasn't promoted. It was about 4 weeks before I managed to hold Amelia, and she was still on a ventilator at that point. She was very unwell. I hadn't received antenatal steroids, and for those 4 weeks, I appeared at the NICU every morning at 8. I stayed until 10 in the evening, and I did very little really in terms of mothering. I didn't know what I was meant to do. Nobody instructed me. I felt a little bit like a spare tool sitting around, watching what was going on. It was a very busy, very loud room. The nurses, there was one nurse for 3 babies. There were 10 babies in that particular room, and it was just, I felt in people's way. It was difficult. For Amelia's point of view, a lot of these photographs, by the way, I've deliberately chosen. They're not pleasant, but they're to give you an indication of how stressed she was during her time in the NICU. She was very unwell, her lungs were not developed, and for a long time we had difficulty getting her off a ventilator onto CPAP and onto oxygen. We had a lot of problems with excessive secretions. There was an awful lot of interventions physically to her to remove her secretions every couple of hours to keep her alive. It was very distressing watching that being done. I should say I have a medical background. She didn't feed for a very long time. She was on TPN for over a week, and every time they introduced breast milk, she had a distended abdomen. There were suspicions of neck. It was never confirmed. As with all 25-weekers, she had many infections. She was septic. Her skin broke out. She had an emerging hemangioma at week 4 on her left foot, which initially was thought to be an injury from the sensor. And as a result, her foot went from looking normal to being black very quickly, and there was some suspicion that she might have to have the foot amputated. It didn't transpire, but the hemangioma is still a problem today. What was I doing for those hours when I was in the NICU? I was sitting looking at my daughter. I didn't know what I was meant to be doing, but I felt I should perhaps record what was going on, just in case she didn't survive, because there didn't appear to be any indication she was going to survive. It was quite difficult for us. I just kept a journal. Every day I sat and I watched her and I wrote down what I saw. Bearing in mind, this was before I ever heard of NIDCAP, had any idea about infant behaviour. I was just doing what every mother felt she only thing she could do was just sit and just take photographs and take notes. What I did notice about Amelia was she was agitated all the time. She never appeared to be happy. Her eyes were fused for the first 2 weeks, so it was incredibly hard to tell, was she awake, was she asleep? She never stopped moving. That is no word of a lie. She still doesn't. She just moves constantly. And as I was quite impressed, because I thought, oh, there's a lot of life there. She's moving about, not realising that actually what she was doing was seeking boundaries and seeking comfort and security. And I didn't know that as her mum. And I suppose pulling up these photographs for this presentation was difficult, because I haven't looked at these in many years. I don't generally speak about her. Now I see what she's saying to me so clearly. At the time was I'm struggling. I really have, there's nothing here to support me. But this was the world she was in, and this was the world that I was observing every day. She was very tense, fingers splayed all the time, constantly stretching out, just constantly moving. I used to even think it was funny. There were days when I'd come in and I'd find her. She would have gone off the little bed they had made, which really wasn't a nest, and she'd be stuck at the end of the incubator, curled up in a ball, and nobody would do anything. As parents, we weren't allowed to intervene, of course, and our visiting hours were restricted in that we weren't allowed to be present for rounds, so you didn't get an opportunity to discuss your child's condition. And when there was staff changeover, you were also excluded, and that could be up to about an hour every day. Things I didn't know as a parent, things that I won't say angry about, but things that nobody discussed with me. I had no idea how important sleep was for babies. I had no idea that babies needed between 20 and 22 hours sleep at Amelia's gestation. I didn't realise that all the brain development and the sensory organisation takes place during sleep. I didn't know that her smell, her taste, her cognition, her speech all depended on the length of time she was getting really good sleep, and that up to 50,000 neurons are being produced a second. Oblivious. I sat there for countless hours and had absolutely no idea. Nor do I believe that our healthcare professionals may have access to this, because I believe nobody would deliberately not give the child the best healthcare available. My expectations were that all children born at this gestation would receive the very best. I now know, after 12 years advocating this field, that isn't the case. Well, if we go a little bit deeper, the cognitive process development, the development of her cortex and her cerebellum, they were all hugely compromised by the environment that she was being cared for. I've put some of these words in purple because they will make sense as I talk to you about Amelia as she currently is. So all of these things, her movement, her coordination, her thinking, her learning processes, they're all, I won't say they're not normal, they're a little bit different, but looking back on her care, there's a very strong possibility that those very early months had a huge influence on her later development. I had no idea still at 36 weeks that my daughter should be getting 20 hours sleep. My daughter has never had anything close to 20 hours sleep in her life. Sleep cycles is another thing I had no idea of. Amelia's eyes were fused for the first 2 weeks of her life, so it was very unusual. It was difficult to find out what state she was in. Because she was moving so much, she constantly looked like she was awake. I had no idea that at the 28 weeks, that's what was critical time for her brain development, that's when the REM starts. I would love to know, looking back now, had we monitored her how much REM she was getting, because based on her current situation, I suspect it was very little. And even if you look at the 33 to 36 weeks, that's when we have babies in open cots. They're no longer confined in an incubator. They still require that deep sleep, and yet many times we don't acknowledge that because we feel they've made that progress out into the cot, and we're still treating them as term babies. I don't believe it actually benefits them. The rights of the child, the UN Convention actually states that children should get the best possible healthcare available. I assumed this was the norm. The UN says it should be. We don't actually deliver it, and I think sometimes it's challenging to be aware of that. As parents, when we're in that traumatic situation, we just assume things, and we don't often think that the children aren't getting what they should be getting. Fast forward a little bit. Amelia's now 12. She still has ongoing problems. I've put some photograph of some sausages up there because that's what my child will take. She takes very, very small volumes when she was a little girl. As she's got older, she still eats very small volumes of food. She was very difficult to wean. And when she was at about 3, I discovered she had an oral aversion. For a long time, it was thought that she just wasn't very keen on eating. Her difficulty was just swallowing. And it turns out that a lot of the interventions that we had subjected her to in the early days had resulted in an oral aversion. So she just doesn't like anything being close to her mouth, whether it's food, whether it's a toothbrush, anything, doesn't go into her mouth. Her diet these days is pretty restricted. She likes white foods. She likes foods that are smooth. She doesn't like textures. She will never mix 2 foods together on a spoon. She doesn't use cutlery for a start. Doesn't like food with skin or bits. So therefore she will eat a sausage, but she'll take the meat out of the middle and she'll leave the skin. She will peel the skin off a bean and eat the contents. Same with sweet corn. It makes it challenging. She's very cautious about the whole area of food and putting food into her mouth, and it becomes an anxiety for her, especially as she grows up and she's socially going out with her friends. You know she's thinking ahead. Is there going to be something I can eat? How are my friends going to react to me? Her friends are pretty good, but I guess as she grows up, she's going to extend that team of friends, and it's going to be difficult for her to explain to them why feeding is a difficulty for her, and it just becomes a social problem, really. When she was in the NICU, she, as I said, I never knew when she was asleep. She just constantly moved around. She was all over the place, and I found a photograph of her actually quite recently in her own bed, and it's quite funny the similarities between what she was like in the incubator and now. She now does sleep, but she's 12. For the first 4 years when we got home, we didn't get a night's sleep. And when she did go to sleep, she required white noise, she didn't like the dark, and she needed somebody to be holding her very tightly. She needed that contact, that support to be with her. She would never, ever fall asleep by herself. She didn't nap as a baby, and I know you might laugh, I resorted to going out in the car 3 or 4 times a day because the vibrations of the car were enough to help her self-regulate and have that 20-minute nap. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't understand why she was so different from other babies. I never linked up all the dots, I guess, with 12 years experience. It's a lot easier to look back and go, oh, okay, now it all makes sense. But at the time, it was just dealing with crisis after crisis for us. And for her, I was conscious that she needed sleep, but it was trying to get her from that awake state to the sleep was incredibly difficult for her. She has a lot of sensory issues, and they started to emerge about age 2.5 after she was discharged from neonatology. So at that point, we were no longer under the care of any specialists, and it became evident she didn't like wearing clothes, didn't like the tags, didn't like the seams, didn't like the touch of certain materials, loved vibrations. The car put her to sleep. We had a little chair that if we sat her in and turned it on and it vibrated, she was at her happiest. And she still loves stuff. She still has little toys that she'll hold, and it almost helps her self-regulate herself. I don't know why, but I guess now we have those strategies in place, it helps her self-manage. The one thing we do have difficulty with still is pain. I know when she was in the NICU, she didn't receive any pain intervention. There was very little kangaroo care. I think I might have done it twice. She didn't breastfeed. Again, the oral aversion was contributing towards that. When Amelia gets a cut or if she falls, it's almost like somebody has shot her. You have never seen a child scream and shout and jump so much when she's in pain. And it might be the tiniest little thing. And at age 12, pain is still a big issue. And in dealing with pain, because of her oral aversion, she doesn't take medication orally. So it's like a vicious circle. So when she gets sick, we end up in a hospital because we can't administer anything orally. The whole pain thing is escalated for her because she's gone from her home environment to a hospital environment, and it's like it perpetuates out of control. I was interested actually in Hugo's comment about smell. Amelia is like a dog. She will smell anything at a mile off, and her heightened sense of smell has brought its own problems. There are things like oranges or yogurts. If she's in a room where somebody has peeled an orange or has eaten a yogurt any time in the last 6 months, she vomits at will. She has no control over her body. They're the two triggers that we've noticed from very early on, that she cannot control herself. And she will smell things. She will go into rooms and go, oh, I don't like the smell here. And there's no smell. She smells tea. I don't smell anything with tea. We often joke saying, like, you could be a detective dog when you're growing up, and it's a joke, but it becomes problematic when you go to the cinema or you go to a concert or somebody's wearing a perfume that's quite strong smelling. She has no control. She'll throw up straight away. Now, when she was small, sight and sound were a problem. She still doesn't like loud noises. Bright lights would have been really aggravating to her when she was a kid. She used to wear sunglasses a lot of the time. And the vestibular and the proprioceptive issues that she has, she's got no balance. She's never had any balance. I think she was about age 8 before she learned to come down the stairs every morning. She would normally come down sitting on her bum because her brain hadn't engaged. And she would just say to me, I can't do the stairs. But by 10 o'clock she could. So there were bits of her brain that had been wired differently. I don't know why. Is it because of the way she was cared for in the NICU? Is it because her brain was developing in a very alien environment? Perhaps. She's quite an awkward child. Her participation in sports is compromised by her lack of her balance. It's been okay up to now, but having to negotiate with schools and educators and try and have them understand these issues, it's very difficult because she's a very tall kid. She doesn't look preterm anymore. She is very active. But then when she does participate, her results aren't up to standard, and schools will often grade the children based on their performance as opposed to their willingness to get involved. And I have a constant battle with our schools because of that, and I explain she may not look like she has issues, but she does, and you can see that in her results. So I suppose grading them based on what the results are is for me, it's unfortunate for the kids. It's demeaning for them. It knocks their self-esteem. She will do everything in sport, but she knows she's not the fastest. She knows she won't be chosen first. She learns very differently. She learns through movement. So when Amelia comes home from school in the evenings to do her homework, she's moving around doing it. We have an island in our kitchen, and she's constantly walking around, and she's writing and she's reading. And that's how she focuses, it's how she concentrates, and it's how she's always done it. Unfortunately, again, in the school setting, that doesn't work. She's constantly sitting on her chair in school, and she's got her legs swinging, or she's playing with blue tack. Now, some teachers have been really good, but some obviously will want the kids all to conform, and it's very hard to have that conversation with them because they don't know, they don't understand. They have no education about what the long-term consequences for our preterm infants are. And sometimes I've been put down as that first-time mum of one child, older mum. I've heard them all. And she gets really anxious over this. At the start of every year, she'll ask me, can you go talk to the teachers? Can you explain to them my quirks and, how I am? And I do, and I know sometimes they're very good, and sometimes they're going, grand, and they put the letter away, and that's the end of it. But she suffers as a result. Her ability to learn is compromised because of it. She's a very bright kid. She has no confidence, and she's got quite low self-esteem, and she's quite anxious because she knows she has difficulties, that she has problems expressing herself. She has dyspraxia. Her organisation skills are atrocious. She still has problems dressing herself. Her fine motor skills are compromised. Her writing is good, but she holds a pen in the most bizarre fashion. And again, we've spent a lot of time with occupational therapy trying to help her, and they've given up. And again, schools have difficulty sometimes with kids who do stuff like this. They don't conform. It's difficult to have that conversation with them. As I mentioned, when she does eat, which isn't too often, she doesn't feel hunger for a start. She doesn't like to use utensils, so I constantly have to remind her, use your fork, use your spoon. She just automatically goes with her fingers because it's easier for her. And the fact that she's eating, I suppose we've facilitated that over the years because we spent such a long time trying to get her to eat. And again, the dyspraxia affects her sports, and I suppose trying to have that communication with her educators has been challenging. For the future, when she's 12 now, she's going from primary school to secondary school, she is going to keep needing some sort of support as she transitions through the education system. She's probably never going to be the most organised of kids. She's never going to run a marathon. She's getting better at articulating the way she is, and she's getting a little better at managing it. So she has chronic lung disease, and she's now at the point of recognising that if things are getting bad on the sporting field, she will stop. Up to now, she didn't have that confidence to put the hand up and say to the teacher, I know my lungs are giving out. She would just continue and she would just drop. So she is getting there, and it's all about trying to build her confidence in herself and explaining to her that she is normal. She does things differently, and she's beginning to understand that our education system hasn't quite caught up with kids like her yet, that they're still looking at the conforming stage. So she's hearing me, she's hearing these messages, and at times she's able to articulate themselves, which is brilliant for us. I mean, because it means I can take a step back, because she's going to have some sort of level of independence, going into the future. What would I say going home? Parents don't know when they come into the NICU. They don't have information. They are reliant 100% on the care that you deliver. We assume that you're delivering the best possible quality care that there is. I know myself that isn't always the case. Parents are willing to learn. If you can educate and inform them, they are there to protect their babies. We will fight tooth and nail to ensure that our kids reach that potential, are as best person that they can be when they leave the NICU. Everything that happens in the NICU has an effect, whether it's positive, negative, or cumulative. Every single interaction leaves a mark. I know, I live with it 12 years on, and they influence the lives of the children and their families for the entire life ahead. And sometimes it can be a long road ahead. I believe working together, we can actually buffer some of those negative consequences, and I think education and information is the way forward, and certainly collaborating with parents. Thanks for your time.